In our lesson for April the 29th, we're going to look at the very interesting story in Acts chapter 12 of the arrest of Peter and the deliverance of Peter in this miraculous way. It's one of my favorite stories in the New Testament. So let me set some background for this story. I remember a time, it was in when I was pastor at First Baptist Church Richardson, when we had a musical group to come in. And I was sitting on the front row and watching them. And I can still remember how I seethed with unhappiness as I listened to them. Not to their music, although I didn't think it was that great. But anyway, not to their music, but to some of their half-baked theology that they were voicing as they kind of segued from one song to the next. Singing was okay, but when they started the preaching part, it just aggravated me. And one of the main things was they gave this kind of prosperity gospel where they basically said that God wants us to be well and be happy and full in every area, physically and mentally and economically. All of these, that God wants us to have to be perfect in all of these different areas. And if things were not right physically, or if things were not right economically, it was probably because there was something wrong in our lives, something bad that we needed to remove so God could pour this blessing out on us. And I remember I was sitting by two of my really favorite people, great Christians, both of whom were suffering from cancer, both of whom would die shortly after that. And I'm thinking, what are they thinking there? You know? Basically what this guy is saying is there's something wrong with you spiritually because you have cancer. It just ticked me off. And basically the reason it did is because it goes counter to everything we read about in the New Testament and Christian history. Here's a news flash. Christians are not always blessed physically and economically and even spiritually. Life is tough for Christians, and no better picture of that can be found than in the New Testament. In this story, Peter, of course, is going to be the focal point, but the other focal point is James, and basically what it says, James was imprisoned and the king cut his head off and he's dead. How's that for a prosperity gospel? But anyway, let's back to the story now. The story reminds us that very often in the Christian life, we suffer physically and economically. It's a part of the Christian life. God does not promise to save us from all of that. He promises to save us through all of that, and that really is the underlying message of our text. He will intervene on Peter's behalf, but he will not intervene on James' behalf, and we just have to accept that and embrace that truth. So let's look at the story. We began with what I call the martyrdom of James, chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. King Herod decides that he's going to initiate this new wave of persecution against the church. Why does he do this? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, he wants to preserve the Roman peace. He wants to keep the status quo. And it seems like more and more people are responding to the gospel, and more people are getting stirred up about the preaching relating to Jesus Christ, and he's got to put that down. That's the first reason. The second thing, he wants to harbor favor with the Jewish religious leaders. They've not been able to put a stop to Christianity, so he thinks that maybe if he does, that will enhance his popularity among them. His target, Luke tells us, is James, the brother of John. He says in chapter 12, verse 2, he had James, the brother of John. Now, who is this? James, the brother of John. These are two of the disciples, remember, the sons of thunder. There's a lot of incidents about them in the Gospels, but one of the important incidents came when James and John approached Jesus and say, we want to be on the right and left hand of you when you bring in your kingdom. Jesus responds to them by saying, can you really drink the drink that I will drink and be baptized with the baptism that I will be baptized with? Basically what Jesus says, if you want to be in these positions of power, are you going to be willing to die for it? And they say, yes, we're willing to do that. We're willing to be baptized with that. And now that claim is fulfilled as James, one of those who said, I'm willing to do that. one of these disciples who wants to be at the right and left hand of Jesus, this disciple named James dies. Now, the thing that strikes me most about the story in verse 2 is how little is said.